Yes, river otter is definitely one of them. Egret, yes. Which egret? The great egret or the snowy egret? Which one is it? Snowy egret, good job, Kathleen. And how about this little cutie right here? Yes, good job, Marcia. This little guy, this cutie right here is a chickadee. And this one is, I believe it's a red-shouldered hawk, this guy right here. All right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Irma Cuevas. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for Sonoma County Parks. And I'm really excited to do this series of Parks Past and Present because we will be co-hosting it with the awesome Laguna de Santa Rosa Foundation. And my co-host is Allison. Hey, Allison. Everybody, this is Allison. Thank you so much for being here, Allison.
Hi, Irma. Great to be with you. Hi, everyone.
Yay, I'm super excited. And so we will, I'll be going over an agenda, and thank you all for participating in our little chat box nature trivia pre-slide to the show, get everybody excited. And I will have to confess that this presentation, even though we open it up with a lot of really cool animals, this presentation is going to be focusing more on the past and present of the Laguna de Santa Rosa. And again, we're going to be doing it in combination, in collaboration with the Laguna de Santa Rosa Foundation. So I'm really excited about this. And I'm going to provide you all with a brief agenda. So I'm just going to have a general overview of the Laguna de Santa Rosa. We're going to take a moment to honor our past, present, and future Indigenous communities of this area who continue to reside in this area in Sonoma County. A little overview of the overlapping cultures and communities around the Laguna. So we're going to be exploring the various communities that came during the gold rush and how they shaped the landscape. And then agriculture that took place around the Laguna de Santa Rosa. And then the Laguna 1800s to present. I'm going to hand it over to my amazing co-host, and Allison will be going over the changes of the landscape within the 1800s to the present. All right. So at this moment, we'll just take a moment to honor past, present, and future generations of Indigenous communities of Sonoma County. And in this particular area, it is the Federated Indians of Great Rancheria, which is various Pomo communities here in the county. And I just want to show you all a map of the various Indigenous tribes of this area. So you can see from this map, it extends all the way kind of out to Calistoga. We have the Wapo and into Napa, Southern Potwin, and Coast Miwok. All right, so the Laguna falls within the territory of the Federated Indians of Great Rancheria. And the Laguna Trail, which is Sonoma County Regional Parks, took over this property, but the Laguna de Santa Rosa, we collaborate a lot in maintaining and doing a lot of stewardship projects out there. So it's a 1.9 mile trail, and it starts either on Occidental Road and or on Highway 12 right before you get into Sebastopol. And this, the Laguna de Santa Rosa is part of a 22 square mile watershed. And a watershed is an area of land where various streams and creeks fall into, and they go into a bigger body of water. And in this case, that big body of water that this flows into is the Russian River. And we all know where the Russian River ends up is at the Pacific Ocean. And I love a little message that the Laguna de Santa Rosa, the foundation says that the Pacific Ocean starts in your backyard. And I'm a firm believer, and I do believe that because everything does end up in the ocean, and it starts here, little streams and the creeks in your neighborhood. And I just wanted to give us kind of a more general overview and kind of show you the different neighborhoods and towns and cities and trails and all of this structure. This map shows you of everything kind of around this huge wetland. And this is a wetland, it's a seasonal wetland, and Allison's going to do a great job of going more into, the social paradigms that we had, this understanding of what wetlands were. So in the past, but wetlands were viewed as vast wasteland, really. They didn't really understand the purpose of wetlands. And it wasn't until more research and science and then the conservation movement, we were able to understand the significance of wetlands, which is, they are flood control. They also clean the water before it gets into bigger bodies of water. And, there's a lot of minerals and a lot of chemistry behind all of this that it's way more advanced than I can understand, but they play a really vital role also in the biodiversity of this area. And the reason I like this map is because, as you can see, Sebastopol and different parts, this was filled in, and we basically filled in a huge seasonal wetland. And now I'm going to start to go into a little bit about the history. So the the series Stories of the Land and Parks Past and Present, we really focus on the natural, cultural, and political forces that shape the landscape of the park and the surrounding area. And in order to do that, we have to have some kind of understanding as how this land was viewed before it was taken on by a park or the conservation movement. And in this case, before we understood what wetlands, the purpose and the significance of wetlands were. And we're going to start with the name. The name itself, which means Laguna, is lake in Spanish. So when we think about these things, when we think about, the past and present of things, the name gives us a kind of a clue and a sneak peek into the past of these areas. And Laguna means lake in Spanish, hence the Spanish were the first colonizers in this area. And all of California was part of what was then New Spain, and then eventually it became part of Mexico. And you can see on this map here, this red line kind of borders all the area that was once Mexico. So, and it was called Alta California, which means high California. And now there's Baja California, which is now part of Mexico. This is all Mexico. So Alta California was pretty much all of this, all of what is now California. And the Spanish were here and they arrived to San Francisco in the late 1700s, and they were all over California by the 1800s. And this is a really awesome map of 1842 that was drawn out by Spanish colonizers who were out here. And you can tell these are the lakes that you see in the summertime during the dry season at the Laguna. If it was in the wet season, they wouldn't look like this, right? This would all be flooded. It would kind of look like this. So again, the Laguna de Santa Rosa, so like Sebastopol and Santa Rosa, all some areas, that was all underwater. And there's a lot of primary sources of the Spanish referring to it as a big lake, and you really couldn't get from what is now Sebastopol to Santa Rosa. And now I'm going to start talking a little bit of the surrounding area. And Santa Rosa, well, that plain, that floodplain right there, is really rich in nutrients and soils. So Sonoma County has always been a really prime area for agriculture. And prior to agriculture being in this area, a big influx of the population came with the gold rush. And people from all over the world were coming to California looking for gold. And Sonoma County, people came to Sonoma County. There's more historical evidence and sources that show that there was a lot of that more happening in Healdsburg looking for gold. But the ones that really made a lot of money were the businesses off of people coming here and selling them the tools that they needed to excavate gold. And here's a flyer talking about, coming to California and making money. But what this did is that it had a huge impact on the local ecosystems that existed at the time. So the Laguna de Santa Rosa was an area that there was a lot of huge, we call them charismatic megafauna, like big animals that lived there. But due to the gold rush and then the arrival of the Spanish and the filling in of the Laguna and then the hunting of these animals, and a lot of them moved north. These are elk, and we have some pronghorns here. And then grizzly bears. There's no more grizzly bears in California. They were overhunted for their meat, for their pelts. And the Spanish had this crazy, it was almost like a bullfight, but they called it a fandango. And they would put a grizzly bear and a big bull in an arena, and they would bet to see who would win. So they brought like some traditions from their country here. And they also introduced sheep and cattle into this area, which also had an impact on the ecosystem. I'm not really going to get into the impacts and the scientific impacts of the ecosystem. There's other organizations, a lot of organizations, including Sonoma County Parks, that are introducing more ungulates into certain areas for the disbursement of native grass seeds. But for this presentation, we're looking mostly at the cultural and historical aspects of the Laguna de Santa Rosa. So we're going to be so now I'm going to talk about the overlapping culture. So we have the Spanish coming in, and they bring in this culture of cattle and vaqueros, which means cowboys in Spanish. And a big business here in Santa Rosa and in Sonoma, all over Sonoma County really, was cattle grazing, and it was a tallow and hide. So with the leather, a lot of Native Americans became really good leather artisans. The tallow, which is basically animal fat or cow fat, was used to make candles. Now remember, during these times there was no electricity, so candles were a high commodity. They were also, the fat was also used to make soap. And we also have soap root. Soap root was used by indigenous communities to heal poison oak, and it would also suds up like soap. But in the Spanish, the root of the soap root, they would dry it and stuff their mattresses with it in order to make their mattresses more soft. So we have different uses for different things happening in the 1800s. And just the vaquero culture, a lot of indigenous communities became really good horse riders and were really good cowboys, also vaqueros. And there was other communities in the surrounding area. In Sebastopol, there was a large Chinese community. In fact, where the new CVS is, right in front of it, there was they found a large like market of the Chinese community there. And also agriculture in the area, a huge agricultural area since like the 1800s in Sonoma County. And if anybody wants to put in the chat box what they think this plant is that these folks are harvesting in the chat box. And I'm just gonna go through some slides while you do that. So here's another image. So again, a lot of Native Americans were pushed off their land. They also started adapting to the new economy and new systems, new people in their area. And this is a group of Native American women who worked in the hop fields. All right, so I'm just gonna take a quick peek to see if anybody answered. I didn't see. So this is hops. Hops was really big in this area here. So, and then the barn styles for hop barns is on this next slide. So this is a hop barn. And then if you look at this old image of the Laguna de Santa Rosa, you can see a very similar style barn here. And that was an old hop barn that is now on the property of where the Laguna de Santa Rosa Foundation is. So I'm at this point going to hand it over to my co-host Allison, and I'm going to stop sharing so she can talk about the Laguna watershed past and present. So just a little recap. So we've had various communities coming through this area. This wetland was used for various, it was a wasteland. It started getting filled. Agriculture was happening here, and then we had the gold rush, and that included more agriculture, more demand on the land. And now I'm going to hand it over to you, Allison. Let's see here. And all right, there you go. Stop sharing.
All right. Thank you, Irma, for giving us so much valuable information to start us off and helping us understand the history that led up to the Laguna of today. Let me just pull up my screen here. All right, that should be good. I am going to turn off my video because it is very warm in my house this afternoon, and I will just let you focus on the slides that I have made for you today. So just give me 1 second. All right. So I am going to run through the more modern history nuggets, challenges the Laguna has faced, and how the Laguna Foundation got started. Some of you may recognize this photo. At the turn of the century, the Laguna was best known as a recreation and resort destination for folks from the big city of San Francisco. They came to recreate in Lake Honeve, just outside the current town of Sebastopol near Occidental Road, and Lake Ballard. Those two lakes no longer exist. Lake Honeve was popular for boating, as you can see in this great photo. I don't know how people were able to boat in those outfits, but it is pretty spectacular. And Lake Ballard was actually really popular for fishing, and that lake was between present-day Guerneville's and River Roads. However, depending on the time of the year, the Laguna was not necessarily ideal for recreation. It was used as a dumping area to discharge waste from the canneries in Sebastopol. And both the city of Sebastopol and the city of Santa Rosa used the waterway for sewage wastewater as well around the turn of the century. The city of Santa Rosa also used its sewer farm as a garbage dump between 1909 and 1926, and regularly illegally dumped other waste into Santa Rosa Creek. The pollution levels were so high that there are actually accounts of hundreds of dead fish floating to the surface of the Laguna in 1913. That's a Press Democrat article. As Irma mentioned, and as you all probably well know, the Laguna regularly floods, and historical communities were no stranger to this phenomenon either. Back then, the response to flooding was to channelize the naturally meandering creeks, as well as drain sections of the main channel of the Laguna. This is channelized Santa Rosa Creek. That straight line is not something you see in nature. Then, during and shortly following the completion of some of the channelization projects, the environmental movement of the 60s and 70s hit. The United States passed legislation like the Clean Water and the Clean Air Act, and things started to look up for the Laguna. Sebastopol closed its old sewage treatment plant and relocated the municipal dump after the catastrophic effects of the 1955 flood, and Santa Rosa instituted its pond storage agricultural reclamation system that we all know today. We started to value our creeks and waterways differently and understand how to better manage the land for flooding, people, and wildlife. Instead of scraping away the vegetation like we saw in that other photo, many agencies and organizations now work to restore creek banks. So this photo is also of Santa Rosa Creek, taken in the same area as the previous channelized photo. It's pretty amazing. The Laguna itself gained popularity as a biological hotspot in the 1970s. The Laguna Foundation was created in 1989 out of that momentum. It was started by volunteers in 1989, became a 501c nonprofit in 1990, and remained volunteer only until 2002. And now there are 15 staff members and a very large and vibrant volunteer community as well. The Laguna de Santa Rosa was recognized as a wetland of international importance in 2011 due to its amazing biological diversity, some of which you can see here, and unique features as a wetland. We are continuing to work to improve the water quality and habitat throughout the Laguna watershed, a result of this complicated history that we're talking about today. We are reestablishing and monitoring populations of rare plants like Sebastopol meadowfoam, tracking wildlife movements through our camera program, restoring native plants to creek banks. That's a socially distant stewardship photo there. And educating the public and school children through our various education programs. And we are excited to continue to work with the Federated Indians of Great Rancheria on a couple restoration and education projects in Copeland Creek in the southern reach of the Laguna watershed. Our projects with the tribe include tracking sediment sources on the creek to improve water quality, expanding our wildlife camera program to track the Copeland Creek corridor. This is close to one of the locations we may place a camera. And we are also going to install interpretive signs along the creek trail. We also strive to educate the public and ourselves on the history and continuing influence of the Pomo, Wapo, and Miwok tribes on the Laguna watershed. The Laguna is an important place for all people of Sonoma County, as well as the animals. It's an amazing place to recreate, whether you are hiking, bike riding, or kayaking, and a wonderful place to observe wildlife. It shows how our communities are truly interconnected by this watershed. As Irma mentioned, through the creeks in our backyards, our actions, and our shared sense of place. Visit our website to find out more about how to get involved with our work. But just being a person and being out there and enjoying the parks and enjoying this trail is a great way to stay involved and to contribute to the history and sense of place that this landscape offers us today. Okay, I'm going to hand it back over to Irma to finish us off.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Allison. That was great. And I am going to go ahead and share my screen, my monitor, and okay. All right. Thank you. Okay, Allison, can you all see my screen now? Yeah, okay, great. All right, so let's see here. Okay, well, I just want to re-emphasize what Allison mentioned at the end here about the Laguna being a place for all residents of Sonoma County to get educated, to recreate. You can even bring your goats out here. I love this image. You know, people in Sonoma County, I really appreciate, I definitely feel all the love for the parks right now, especially given the circumstances. And it just reminds me of how lucky we are to have these spaces here. And also, I love going into places where I know that, you know, other people have lived, traveled through, or shaped the landscape. And that's really part of the reason why we do these Parks Past and Present series. And of course, I also love the Laguna because of the biodiversity of the ecosystems. And something else that I would like to include when it comes to biodiversity is the human diversity. So a lot of people have come throughout Sonoma County, have shaped the landscape, and we have all thrived from this amazing wetland, including different species, which is always really cool. This is a great birding spot. I'm not into birds, but I always like geek out. I always see some really cool stuff out here. So I want to thank you all for participating or joining us for our webinar on the Laguna de Santa Rosa past and present. And most of our programs are funded by the Sonoma County Parks Foundation.org. If you want to send a note in, or if you want to support our programming, you can do so through this website, SonomaCountyParksFoundation.org. Please feel free to visit our website, SonomaCountyParks.org, to look to see what other webinars are being offered. And Allison, if you want to go ahead and put in the chat box the website for the Laguna Foundation, if folks want to hear what's going on at the Laguna. And I'm going to take a minute. We still have some time to answer some questions. And there was one question in the chat room, Allison, if you could please answer. Somebody asked, what were they canning that was getting into the Laguna?
That's a good question. I know there was tomato canneries, and one of the main fruit crops, as we well know, was apples as well. So all of the discharge and waste from those canneries went into the Laguna. There probably were other crops as well, but those are the ones that I have seen documented in photos and in writing.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I'm going to take one more peek at our chat box to see if there's any more questions. Oh, what kind of birds live on the Laguna? Well, I will mention the ones that I know, but Allison, please chime in. And if anybody else is an avid birder, please feel free to put that in the chat box. I've seen night herons, great blue herons, the egrets, snowy egrets, and great egrets. Let me go ahead and just go back to our first, well, I'll look for it. Well, people talk about this, but those are the main ones that I've seen, Allison, but anything else?
There are so many birds in the Laguna. It's a great question. I think the ones you mentioned, Irma, are great because they are they're so fun to see. They're huge birds and they are very likely suspects in the Laguna. We do have lots of resources on the Laguna Foundation website. We actually have our bird checklist up for free right now during the COVID crisis. So I can also drop a link to that in the chat box. But the Laguna Foundation is part of why it's designated as a wetland of international importance is because of its importance to migrating birds, birds that are flying along the Pacific Flyway, either to breed or to nest or to feed. And that's mainly actually for birds that stop over here in the winter when the Laguna is flooded. We get a whole variety of ducks and different waterfowl. And that is part of why the Laguna is so important. It also has amazing migrating birds throughout the year, though. Right now, you can see, I think, 5 different kinds of swallows out at the Laguna and that general area, 4 common ones. And there are songbirds that are breeding and migrating right now. Things, even neotropical birds like orioles, you can see out at the Laguna. I'll put a link in the chat box and please do check out that bird checklist. I could do a whole nother hour just talking about every bird that's out at the Laguna.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Allison. And there is a couple more questions. So what about the history of the Russians in the area? Great question from Helen. I have done a couple of webinars that focus more on the coast, which is really more where we still have some tangible evidence of Russians in the area, and that is obviously Fort Ross, and it's a state park now. And the webinars are Gualala Point Regional Park past and present and Doran Park past and present, because they were mostly on the coast and they did come inland, but I didn't focus on them on this presentation. But thank you. I'll keep that into account when I do other presentations of the area. So what kind of birds? We got that. Question, in the early 20th century, was there wheat grown? I have not read anything that mentions wheat in this area. And when I say this area, I'm thinking of West County. I know there was a lot of grapes, apples. Speaking of Russians in this area, they introduced apricots and cherries. They also brought a lot of seeds with them. And the Spanish also brought wheat, but it was grown, I feel like, more on eastern Sonoma County, because Vallejo, who used to govern this Alta California, which is now California, did bring wheat into the area, but I don't know of any of it being in West County. Let's see here. Okay, yes, the Laguna de Santa Rosa does control flooding in the Russian River community during heavy rainfalls. Are there weeds that choke the waterways currently? Allison, maybe you could be able to answer that about weeds in the Laguna.
Yes, so the Laguna, because of the changes in the history that we discussed, the ways it's been altered, has become rather good habitat for some aquatic invasive weeds. The main one that we see on the Laguna is we call it Ludwigia. Its common name is water primrose. That's the bright green that you can see on the banks of the Laguna in certain areas where it's really open and shallow. And that was actually a weed that was introduced from aquariums, from someone dumping an aquarium plant into the waterway. So emphasizing that streets to creeks idea is really important to prevent things like that from happening. It is something that we are working to address mainly through tracking sediment sources, like I mentioned, and trying to improve the water quality, which improves the phosphorus system and nitrogen systems within the Laguna. That is what creates the conditions that Ludwigia thrive in. We're trying to change the conditions, basically, is what I'm trying to say.
Awesome, thank you. And then Allison and Christine have put in a great link in here for bird resources and educational resources in the chat room if you want to copy that or take a picture of it for your own resource. Thank you for sharing that. And let's see, last one, a great place to see otters at the Laguna. All I know is that if you get there early, you're probably going to be able to see more otters. They're more active during the morning, and I've seen them along the edges. But maybe you can chime in, Allison, where you or some of your volunteers have seen river otters in that area.
We've heard of river otters in Santa Rosa Creek and even all the way up in the Prince Memorial Greenway. So it's worth looking at those bigger tributary creeks as well. That's a good place to start.
Awesome, thank you. And where I have seen them is at Spring Lake Park, and just recently at Doran at the estuary, I saw right there in Cheney Creek a river otter there. So really cute. Okay, all right, it looks like that's it. Yeah, we are right on time. It's 3:32. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. Please check out both the Laguna Foundation website and Sonoma County Parks website if you are interested in future webinars. And I want to thank my co-host. You were awesome. And I really just appreciated everybody joining us because right now there's so many webinars and so many different options, virtual options. And so we really appreciate your time and support. Thank you. And I'm going to go ahead and say goodbye.